A cold day in 1872. The Atlantic Ocean is calm. The sky is clear, the winds gentle, and the atmosphere serene. But then, a British ship, Dei Gratia, spots something that defies every rule, every law, and every logic. A ship, alone in the open sea, motionless, as if time itself has frozen. It's the Mary Celeste. No signal, no sound, no crew. Just a silent, deserted vessel gently swaying on the waves. When they stepped aboard, the scene was unbelievable. Plates were still on the dining table, clothes neatly arranged, food and water supplies intact. Everything was in its place, except the people. The captain, his family, the crew, all gone. No signs of struggle, no traces of a storm, and no evidence of piracy. Where did they go? Was it a natural disaster or something beyond human understanding? The sun had barely kissed the horizon as the Mary Celeste set sail from New York Harbor on November 7th, 1872. It was a crisp morning, and the air smelled of salt water and adventure. For Captain Benjamin Briggs, this was just another familiar route. The ship's course was simple, from New York to Genoa, a journey that had been completed countless times before by ships in the same fleet. The sea was unusually calm for the time of year. The waves rolled gently, as if the ocean itself was in a tranquil slumber. No storms threatened the horizon, no dark clouds hung overhead. The wind, though not brisk, was steady, pushing the ship along its course. To the crew, this was perfect weather for a long voyage. They would cross the Atlantic with little disturbance, and the Mary Celeste would be just another ship on the long and reliable trade route. For Captain Briggs, this journey was particularly special. This was not just another voyage. It was a mission for his family. His wife Sarah and his young daughter Sophia were on board, an uncommon choice for the captain. Most families stayed behind, leaving the hardships of the sea to the men who sailed. But Benjamin, a man of strong faith and unshakable resolve, had decided to bring his loved ones along. The familiarity of the route made it feel safe, even to his family. The crew, too, was an experienced one. There was no reason to believe that anything could go wrong. The day was bright, and the ship's sails caught the wind perfectly. The deck was quiet, save for the sound of creaking wood and the faint call of gulls overhead. The crew went about their duties without hurry, knowing that this would be a peaceful journey. The cargo hold was filled with barrels of alcohol, a profitable and reliable cargo for the journey, but the ship's true treasure was its peaceful pace. It was, in every sense, the kind of voyage anyone would dream of. Yet beneath the surface of this tranquil voyage, there was something darker at play. Captain Briggs had no idea that the calm sea he saw stretching ahead would soon become the backdrop for one of the greatest mysteries of the sea. The crew went about their duties. The world seemed at peace, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But as the ship sailed further into the Atlantic, the calmness began to feel like a false promise. Something, somewhere in the depths of the sea, was waiting. The stillness around the Mary Celeste felt almost too perfect. The ship was sailing on a course it had taken 100 times before. But what awaited them at the edge of that familiar horizon was something unknown. The sea was calm. The route was familiar. But the Mary Celeste was about to become a ghost ship. The sea had remained serene for days, and there was no indication that anything unusual would occur. Captain Briggs had often spoken to the crew of how he felt fortunate to be on this particular voyage. He spoke fondly of the calm waters and the beautiful sky above. But those words would soon be forgotten, replaced with an eerie silence that would haunt the Mary Celeste for centuries to come. It was on December 5th, 1872, that the Mary Celeste was last seen at its last known coordinates: 37 degrees 30 minutes north, 17 degrees 15 degrees west. A British ship, the Dei Gratia, was sailing nearby when Captain David Morehouse spotted the Mary Celeste drifting aimlessly, its sails in tatters. At first, he thought it was just another ship in need of assistance, but as he drew closer, he realized that something was terribly wrong. The Mary Celeste was not flying a flag. There were no signs of life on board. The ship appeared abandoned, eerily still, as if time had stopped. Captain Morehouse and his crew decided to board the vessel to investigate further. As they stepped aboard, a strange chill swept through them. The ship felt cold, lifeless. The silence was suffocating. Everything seemed untouched, yet completely wrong. The cargo hold was full, with barrels of alcohol still secured in their places. The ship's log, a crucial piece of the puzzle, was left behind. Still open to the date of November 25th, just a few days before it was found. The log indicated that everything was normal up until the last entry, which was made on November 24th. No indication was given that anything was amiss. But it was the missing crew that sent shivers down the spine of the Dei Gratia's crew. The ship's lifeboat was gone, its absence implying that the crew had abandoned ship in a hurry. What had caused them to leave? Why had no distress signals been sent? There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no indication of a violent attack. The ship appeared to be abandoned without a trace of why. One by one, the crew of the Dei Gratia explored the decks. In the captain's quarters, they found Captain Briggs's personal belongings neatly packed, including his wife's and daughter's clothing. There was no sign of panic, no evidence of a desperate escape. Even the ship's food and water supplies remained untouched. It was as if the crew had simply disappeared, leaving their lives behind without explanation. The Mary Celeste drifted aimlessly for days before being found. No one knew where the crew had gone, why they left, or what happened to them. The coordinates at which the Dei Gratia had found the Mary Celeste would go down in history as the last known location of the ill-fated ship. A location that held no answers, only more questions. Was it the cargo? Was it the alcohol fumes that had sparked panic? Had the crew encountered something they couldn't understand or explain? Or was it something more sinister? Something beneath the waves that had caused them to flee in terror? The coordinates were now etched into the history books, but they were only the beginning. The mystery of the Mary Celeste would not be solved in the coming days, months, or even years. What happened in those final moments before the crew vanished would remain one of the greatest mysteries of the sea. The Atlantic was quiet, unnervingly so. On December 5th, 1872, the brig Dei Gratia sailed steadily under the command of Captain David Morehouse. The crew had grown accustomed to the monotony of the sea, but something on the horizon snapped their focus. A distant silhouette, tilting unnaturally with the wind. Another vessel. As the Dei Gratia drew nearer, unease settled in. The ship's sails flapped loosely in the breeze, some torn, others barely hanging. It wasn't flying any distress signal, no flags at all. The sea was calm. No storm could explain this state. And yet the ship drifted aimlessly. Through his spyglass, Captain Morehouse read the name etched on the bow, Mary Celeste. The name struck a chord. He knew the captain, Benjamin Briggs. They'd shared dinner in New York before each man departed on his respective journey across the Atlantic. The Mary Celeste had left 8 days before them. How had they caught up to her, and why was she adrift? Suspicion turned to alarm. Morehouse ordered a boarding party. First Mate Oliver DeVoe and a small crew rowed toward the ghostly vessel. As they approached, an eerie silence surrounded them. No crew, no voices, no movement. Just the groaning of old timber and the whisper of the wind. DeVoe stepped onto the deck. It was slick, slightly damp, but not damaged. The rigging hung loose. The sails, while not completely in tatters, suggested neglect. He called out. No response, not even an echo. Below deck, the strangeness deepened. The crew's belongings remained untouched, clothing still folded, pipes and mugs placed carefully on shelves. A sewing machine, still threaded. In the galley, meals had been started but not finished. In the captain's quarters, a child's doll sat propped on the bed beside a Bible. But there were no people. The logbook's last entry was November 24th, 10 days ago, written as if everything had been normal. Coordinates placed the ship near the Azores, where nothing unusual had been reported. Yet now, the ship sat hundreds of miles off course. The cargo, 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol, was mostly intact. However, 9 barrels were strangely empty, their staves made of a different, more porous wood. The lifeboat was gone. The compass shattered. The clock stopped. There was no blood, no sign of mutiny or struggle. It was as though everyone had simply vanished. DeVoe stepped back on deck and looked out across the water. Nothing. No land, no wreckage, no answers. Just the Dei Gratia, rocking silently in the distance, and the Mary Celeste, haunted by absence. They would sail her to Gibraltar for salvage. But long before any tribunal, the whispers began. Had the crew gone mad? Did the alcohol leak? Was it pirates, or worse, something supernatural? Whatever had happened aboard the Mary Celeste was buried now beneath the endless ocean and within the silence of its abandoned hull. A silence that would echo for centuries. They called it a ghost ship. But there were no ghosts, only questions. When the Mary Celeste was finally towed into Gibraltar by the Dei Gratia, word of the discovery spread like wildfire. A ship found adrift in the Atlantic. No crew, no signs of violence, no wreckage, no answers. The newspapers dubbed it the ghost ship. But what chilled the public more was that there were no apparitions, only a perfect silence where life had once been. The boarding crew had reported strange details, too specific to be dismissed, too vague to explain. The cargo hold was mostly full, carrying hundreds of barrels of raw alcohol. The valuable contents were untouched by looters. The crew's possessions remained undisturbed, as if they'd been expected to return at any moment. Captain Briggs's sword was still sheathed. His wife's clothes still hung in the wardrobe. His daughter's toys were neatly arranged, like a child had just been playing there. But the lifeboat was gone, and so was every human soul. At first, authorities speculated piracy, but no valuables were missing. Then they suggested mutiny. But why would mutineers abandon a perfectly good ship in the middle of the ocean? The Mary Celeste herself bore no signs of trauma. No cannon fire, no broken decks, just 3.5 feet of water in the bilge. Troublesome, yes, but hardly fatal. The ship was seaworthy. The food supplies were abundant. The sails were worn, yet functional. Only the navigation instruments were disturbed. The ship's chronometer was missing. The sextant was gone. The ship's log had stopped 10 days prior. The idea of abandonment haunted every theory. The British Vice Admiralty Court launched an investigation. But the mystery only deepened. Testimonies clashed. The Dei Gratia crew was praised one moment and suspected the next. Could they have murdered the crew for salvage rights? There was no proof, just suspicion. And the eerie condition of the Mary Celeste, too intact for tragedy, too empty for peace. Then came the rumors. A chemical explosion? Unlikely. The barrels had leaked, yes, but caused no fire. A water spout? Perhaps. But that wouldn't explain the missing navigational tools or lifeboat. Some whispered of sea monsters, others of alien abduction, even in an age where steam still challenged sail. But perhaps the most haunting idea of all was this. Maybe the crew had simply panicked. Maybe the alcohol fumes triggered fears of explosion. Maybe they evacuated temporarily, expecting to return. And maybe, just maybe, something went wrong. The sea, after all, is unforgiving. A rope snaps. A lifeboat drifts. A captain makes one wrong decision, and an entire story ends in silence. The Mary Celeste sailed alone into history, a ghost ship without ghosts, carrying nothing but unanswered questions across the waves. Its crew, never seen again. Its fate, never confirmed. What remained was a ship full of life, abandoned. And the most chilling part? No one heard them go. Before Mary Celeste became the ghost ship etched into maritime legend, it had a living soul guiding its helm, Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs, a man of faith, discipline, and deep devotion to his family. His story, often overshadowed by the mystery that swallowed him, begins not with vanishing, but with trust. Briggs was no reckless wanderer. He came from a proud seafaring lineage in Massachusetts, where salt water ran through generations of veins. By the time he stood on the deck of the Mary Celeste, he had already spent years navigating treacherous waters with precision and caution. He was respected by his peers, known for his calm demeanor, and deeply admired by his crew. But perhaps what set him apart most was his decision, unusual for the time, to bring his wife, Sarah, and 2-year-old daughter, Sophia Matilda, aboard. To Briggs, the sea was not just a profession. It was a place of serenity and purpose. Where others feared isolation, he saw unity. He meticulously planned the voyage from New York to Genoa, Italy. The cargo was industrial alcohol, a volatile substance, yes, but legally shipped and properly stored. Briggs trusted his ship, his crew, and his route. The Mary Celeste set sail on November 7, 1872. Weather reports were fair. Spirits aboard were high. Captain Briggs wrote to his mother before departure, assuring her the crew was capable and peaceable. His final letter spoke of hope. He looked forward to their arrival in Europe and the adventure the family would share together. But something, some silent, unseen force, waited out at sea. History would remember Briggs as a mystery. But those who knew him remembered a man of order. He was not one to panic, not one to abandon ship, which is precisely why his disappearance remains so confounding. When the Mary Celeste was found drifting, with his belongings untouched and his family's items carefully arranged, the evidence suggested anything but chaos. His sword lay unused. The ship's log, penned in his steady hand, ended without alarm. The last known coordinates placed them near the Azores, an uneventful stretch of sea. And then, nothing. What would make a man like Benjamin Briggs take his wife, child, and entire crew into a lifeboat? Never to be seen again? No storm. No enemy ship. No cry for help. Just silence. Some say he misjudged a threat, leaking alcohol fumes, perhaps. Others believe he may have been deceived by a freak, natural event, a waterspout, or a seismic tremor. But every theory unravels under scrutiny. Nothing fits the man. Briggs was a captain who believed in control, yet something beyond his grasp wrested that control away. Whatever he saw in those final moments convinced him, not just to act, but to evacuate everything he held dear, and it left behind only questions, a ship, a name, a story without an ending, and at its heart, Captain Benjamin Briggs, a man who never returned from the sea he trusted most. A captain is only as strong as the men he commands, and the crew of the Mary Celeste was, by all records, solid, seasoned, and trusted. But when the ship was found adrift and lifeless, questions emerged not just about where they had gone, but who they truly were. Captain Benjamin Briggs handpicked each member. He knew the ocean was merciless and would show no forgiveness for weakness. This crew had to be dependable, and on paper, they were. First Mate Albert G. Richardson was a man of strong character and steady hands. A friend of the Briggs family, he had served on multiple voyages before and was even trusted enough to dine with the captain's wife and daughter. Calm under pressure, loyal and precise, Richardson was not the kind of man to abandon ship without reason. Then there was second mate Andrew Gilling, a young but competent seaman from New York. Gilling's record was clean, though he had battled illness in the past. Some whispered that he was prone to mood swings, but nothing on record indicated instability or violence. Still, in the fog of mystery, even small shadows loom large. The steward, Edward Head, was known for his hospitality and attention to detail. He had a reputation for keeping quarters clean and meals punctual, even during storms. His personal items were found untouched in his cabin. His journal, though sparse, ended as routinely as ever. The rest of the crew included 4 German seamen, the Lorenzen brothers and 2 other sailors, all experienced, capable, and well-recommended. They spoke little English, but were respected for their work ethic and discipline. No one aboard feared mutiny. No one anticipated betrayal. But something had changed. When the Mary Celeste was boarded by the Dei Gracia, there were no signs of panic or struggle. The crew's beds were made. Belongings were in place. Their pipes, boots, and clothing remained as if they'd simply stepped out and would return any moment. They never did. Their lifeboat was missing, but no distress signal had been hoisted. Why would an entire crew leave a seaworthy vessel with food, water, and a full cargo into the open ocean? If it was mutiny, why not take the ship itself? If it was fear, what caused it? A silent threat, like leaking fumes from the alcohol barrels. A hallucination, an unseen illness, or something more sinister, perhaps from within. Was there a disagreement that spiraled into panic? Did one man's fear spread like wildfire? What we know is this. Not a single man, not one trace of the Mary Celeste's crew was ever found. Not floating, not washed ashore, not buried in any sailor's grave. It was as if they had been swallowed whole by the sea itself. They were not criminals. They were not madmen. They were hand-picked, trusted, and experienced. And yet, they vanished. 1 crew, 10 souls, gone, leaving behind only their names and silence. In an era when merchant ships braved the wild seas with only hardened men aboard, the Mary Celeste carried something rare: fragility. Captain Benjamin Briggs had brought his wife, Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia Matilda, on the voyage. It was a choice that raised eyebrows, even among seafarers used to storms and solitude. But to Briggs, it was more than sentiment. It was faith. Sarah Briggs was not unfamiliar with the ocean. She had accompanied her husband on past voyages, sharing his rhythm of tide and compass. Letters, she wrote, speak of a woman both devoted and resilient, a calm presence beside a man of discipline. Sophia, barely walking, was the light of their lives, her small laughter reportedly echoing across the deck like music to the otherwise mechanical life at sea. They boarded the Mary Celeste on November 5th, 1872. Their cabin was small but lovingly arranged. Sarah's Bible tucked beside her pillow, Sophia's tiny shoes neatly placed under the berth. The ship, loaded with over 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol, was not a place for a toddler. But for the Briggs family, it was a vessel not just of commerce, but of togetherness. Fellow sailors found it odd, even unwise. The Atlantic was unpredictable. Illness, pirates, storms, any of these could snatch a life in seconds. But to Captain Briggs, this was a journey of unity. He wrote to his mother days before setting sail, "I have a good mate and crew, and I hope we shall have a pleasant passage." But the pleasant passage never came. When the Mary Celeste was discovered adrift, the family was gone, without a trace. Sarah's sewing kit was untouched. Sophia's blanket, delicately folded, lay undisturbed. There were no signs of violence. No cries had ever been heard. It was as if the family had simply vanished from their cabin, leaving behind only warmth and questions. Why would a father, renowned for his caution, risk the life of his wife and child at sea? Why would he abandon ship unless he saw a threat more terrifying than the ocean itself? And more hauntingly, how could an entire family disappear without leaving a single footprint on the water? Some speculate that leaking fumes from the alcohol cargo caused a panic, a fear of explosion. Perhaps Briggs ordered an evacuation into the lifeboat, believing it temporary. But the lifeboat was never recovered. Others whispered darker theories: piracy, mutiny, even madness. But nothing matches the reality. A family full of hope, reduced to mystery. The image of Sophia's toys, untouched, and Sarah's book left open on a page mid-sentence remains one of the most chilling details in maritime lore. The ocean took many ships, but with the Mary Celeste, it stole something rarer: a family. And what lingers is not just the question of how they disappeared, but why they were ever aboard in the first place. Long before it drifted into maritime legend, the Mary Celeste bore another name, Amazon. And long before it became the world's most famous ghost ship, it had already earned a reputation for misfortune. Built in Nova Scotia in 1861, the Amazon was a proud brigantine, crafted from strong timber with sleek lines meant to cut through Atlantic winds. Her maiden voyage, however, was anything but glorious. The ship's first captain fell gravely ill and died shortly after she set sail. A tragic omen, some said. Just coincidence, others insisted. But then came the collisions. On another early voyage, the Amazon struck a fishing boat in the English Channel, sinking it. No lives were lost, but the whisper of bad luck began to cling like sea fog. Later, she ran aground near Cape Breton and had to be salvaged at great cost. Eventually, after a string of repairs, misadventures, and diminishing faith, the owners sold her. A Boston consortium purchased the ship, refitted her, and gave her a new name, Mary Celeste. A fresh start, or so they thought. Under Captain Briggs, she was supposed to begin a new chapter, one of fortune, not fear. But some sailors believed a ship carries more than cargo. It carries memory, echoes, perhaps even curses. The Mary Celeste was reborn, but not cleansed. Just 1 year after her renaming, she was found adrift, abandoned in the vast Atlantic, sails torn, lifeboat missing, yet structurally sound and stocked with food. The event would send shockwaves through maritime history, but some whispered the ship had always been cursed. The disappearance of her crew was not a beginning. It was the finale to a long, haunted saga. Sailors have long feared ships with unlucky names or dark pasts. The sea is superstitious. A vessel that spills blood, that tastes too much death or disaster, is avoided. But the Mary Celeste seemed to attract the very worst, again and again. Even after the mystery, her story didn't end. The ship changed hands several times. In 1885, Her final owner deliberately wrecked her off the coast of Haiti in a failed insurance fraud scheme. He went bankrupt. The ship was a total loss. It was as if the ocean had finally swallowed what it had always resented. A ship born in tragedy, baptized by collisions, renamed in desperation, and retired in scandal. Was she cursed? Or just a coincidence stitched together by fear and folklore? Perhaps the answer lies not in the accidents, but in the spaces between them, in the questions no one could answer, in the eerie calm of an abandoned deck, in the silence of 10 vanished souls. The Mary Celeste had sailed for over a decade before her final voyage, but it was never a smooth journey, and even now, more than a century later, her name drips with dread, like salt water off a forgotten hull. The port of New York, November 1872. The morning fog clung to the rigging like old hands refusing to let go. Along Pier 50, the Mary Celeste stood ready, its white sails furled, hull freshly painted, and barrels of industrial alcohol stacked deep in her hold. But beneath the routine bustle of departure, something about this voyage felt different. Captain Benjamin Briggs moved with precision, as always. His logbook crisp, his orders quiet but firm. A deeply religious man, Briggs had a reputation for sobriety, fairness, and discipline. He had turned down several shipping offers that didn't feel right. But this voyage, this he accepted. And he brought his wife Sarah and daughter Sophia along. That alone spoke volumes. The ship's manifest was detailed. Over 1,700 barrels of denatured alcohol bound for Genoa, Italy. Dangerous cargo, yes, but legal. Explosive under the wrong conditions. The barrels were secured, the deck scrubbed, and the lifeboat double-checked. Captain Briggs inspected every nail, every crate. Nothing was left to chance. The crew? A lean team of 7, hand-picked. First mate Albert Richardson, a seasoned and trusted sailor. The cook, the steward, and 4 able seamen, mostly German. All with experience, all reportedly loyal. Yet, in the close quarters of a ship, silence between strangers can echo louder than a storm. Final provisions were loaded. Salted meats, biscuits, fresh water. Sarah packed extra linens. Sophia's tiny doll was tucked into her bunk. It was a voyage meant to last weeks, maybe a month at sea. A common route, a common cargo. But even the most ordinary voyages can turn strange. Before departure, Captain Briggs wrote a final letter to his mother. In it, he expressed confidence in the ship and his crew. He even noted, "I feel quite satisfied with the vessel and everything connected with her." Yet some reports suggest he voiced concern over the volatile cargo. Alcohol in barrels that might expand, leak, or react to heat. Sarah, in her own quiet way, prepared too. Her Bible was placed beside her bed. A needlepoint kit was packed neatly. The family cabin was arranged not like a sailor's berth, but a temporary home. The weather, according to logs, was fair. No storms on the horizon, no port warnings. On November 7th, the Mary Celeste departed New York, sailing steadily into the Atlantic. No one aboard knew it would be the last time they'd ever be seen alive. And though every knot was tied, every barrel counted, and every plan laid with care, none of it would matter. Because soon, all that would be left of the Mary Celeste was a drifting ghost, a ship intact, food untouched, cargo still there, but no souls aboard. Did something go wrong with the barrels? Did fear take root during a silent night watch? Or was there something more sinister hiding beneath those calm preparations? The voyage had begun with order and prayer, but the sea had other intentions. The morning was still as glass when they boarded her. November 7th, 1872, New York Harbor. A thin mist drifted above the water, wrapping the Mary Celeste like a veil. She rocked gently against the dock, her sails tied, her name freshly painted across her bow like a quiet promise to the sea. Captain Benjamin Briggs stood tall at the gangplank, his hat in one hand, eyes scanning the sky. He wasn't just stepping onto a ship, he was stepping into command, into legacy, into unknown waters. His wife, Sarah, held little Sophia close. The three of them were more than passengers. They were a family, choosing the ocean as their next home. One by one, the crew followed. First Mate Albert Richardson was next. Stoic and reliable, his boots struck the wooden deck with the weight of discipline. Then came Volkert and Bas Lorenzen, seamen from Denmark and Germany, speaking little but knowing much. The steward, the cook, and the rest climbed aboard with crates and bags in hand, greeted by the scent of salt, rope, and tar. The final checks were made, cargo secured, lifeboat lifted, ropes coiled in perfect spirals. There was a strange quietness to it all, not ominous, just still. Dock workers looked on. A few nodded farewells, others watched in silence, as if unsure why something so routine felt so heavy. Sarah's footsteps were light on the planks. She clutched her daughter's hand and looked up at the sails. "It's a beautiful ship," she whispered. Sophia didn't answer. She was watching the sea. Below deck, their cabin was small but comfortable. A Bible lay on the table. A doll sat tucked near the bunk. Sarah arranged linens with care, humming softly, almost to keep something at bay. It was the kind of hum one uses to calm children. Or fear. Captain Briggs moved like a man who trusted routine. He checked his compass twice, reviewed the charts again, issued orders with calm authority. There was no reason to expect anything unusual, no sign, no warning. But the sea, as always, gave nothing away. The gangway was pulled, the ropes cast, the ship creaked as she pulled away from the dock, slow and graceful. The crew took their positions. The sails unfurled like white wings against a pale sky. And then they were off. No ceremony, no trumpet, just a ship, a crew, a family, and a horizon waiting to be crossed. From the dock, a sailor from another ship muttered, "Fair winds!" But an older man nearby didn't speak. He just watched the Mary Celeste fade into the fog, his lips pressed tight, his eyes unreadable, as if he'd seen that ship before, as if he knew her name came with a shadow, as if he sensed she might come back without them. As the Mary Celeste sailed deeper into the Atlantic, there was an unsettling calm that hung over her. The ship, though newly inspected and carefully prepared, was now alone in the open sea, a vast expanse of water that seemed to stretch on forever. The conditions on board, at first glance, were impeccable. The ship was structurally sound, the sails caught the wind with precision, and the cargo, though dangerous, was securely stored. Every corner of the Mary Celeste had been checked, every rope tightened. It was a well-maintained vessel designed for long voyages with a history of reliable travel. Yet as the days passed, subtle signs began to emerge. Signs that upon reflection seemed more ominous than ordinary wear and tear. Below deck, the crew quarters were undisturbed. Bunks neatly made, personal items in place as though no one had ever touched them. A half-drunk cup of tea sat on the steward's table, untouched since it was set there. In the galley, the stove was cold, but the hearth hadn't been used in days. It was as if time itself had stopped inside the ship. The food stores were untouched, fresh water still filled the barrels. But the signs of daily life, the quiet murmur of sailors' voices, the smell of cooking, the faint scuff of boots against wood, were eerily absent. Up on the deck, the ship creaked under the strain of the wind, but there was no sound of the crew working. No shout of orders, no footsteps hurrying about. Only the occasional flutter of the sails in the breeze, and then something strange caught the eye. The ship's lifeboat, normally secured at the stern, was missing. Gone, as if it had been taken, but with no trace of struggle. The rigging was still intact, but the boat's absence left a hollow feeling on the otherwise orderly deck. More disturbing were the ship's log entries, which grew less frequent as the voyage continued. The last entry made by Captain Briggs was a routine notation, nothing out of the ordinary. But after that, nothing. The silence between the entries was almost deafening. The ship's condition was not immediately alarming, but as the days stretched on without a sign of distress, without even a single note of communication from the crew, something felt undeniably wrong. There was no damage to the ship itself, no indication of a storm or violent event, yet the absence of life, the complete stillness, spoke volumes. By the time the Mary Celeste was discovered months later, her condition had not deteriorated. The sails still billowed as if freshly unfurled. The rigging was taut. The wheel was still in place. Even the cargo, although improperly secured at first glance, was intact. No signs of fire, no evidence of battle or mutiny. It was as though a fleeting moment of time had passed, one that left no marks, no signs of its passing. Yet, in that stillness, in that untouched condition, was the haunting question. What happened here? The Mary Celeste drifted aimlessly, her sails catching the occasional gust, but there was no one to steer her. The sea stretched endlessly around her, an ocean of emptiness. But it wasn't the stillness of the ship that struck the crew of the Dei Gratia. It was the unsettling silence aboard. When the Dei Gratia first spotted the Mary Celeste on December 4th, 1872, the ship seemed almost too pristine, too untouched by time or weather. The bright white sails were still full, though no crew could be seen. There were no signs of a storm, no damage to the hull, and nothing that indicated a sudden disaster had befallen the Mary Celeste. Yet something about her felt deeply wrong. The first thing that caught the eye of the Dei Gratia's crew was the missing lifeboat. It wasn't just the absence of the boat itself that was peculiar. It was the way it had vanished. There were no signs of struggle, no torn ropes, or signs of a hasty departure. The davits, where the lifeboat had once been secured, were untouched. The boat was simply gone, as if it had been taken deliberately. But by who? And why? The thought of the ship being abandoned in such a manner was incomprehensible. The Mary Celeste had a full complement of 9 souls aboard, all of whom had vanished without a trace. If they had left in a hurry, why would they take only the lifeboat? Why leave behind everything else? Their possessions, the ship's precious cargo, the very ship that could have taken them to safety. As the Dei Gratia crew boarded the ghost ship, the strange reality of the situation began to settle in. The ship was well stocked with provisions. Barrels of salted meat, crates of dry biscuits, and fresh water were all accounted for. There were no signs of desperation, no signs that the crew had been fighting for survival. Food was abundant, water was plentiful, but the ship's mainstay, its lifeboat, was gone. The cabin of Captain Briggs was undisturbed, his logbook resting open on the desk, the final entry made just days before. His family's quarters were intact, a bed neatly made, with Sarah's sewing kit still by the side. Sophia's doll sat on the edge of the bunk. There was no sign of panic, no indication of haste. Everything was in place, as though the ship's crew had simply vanished. And then, the chilling realization set in. The ship was adrift, without a single person on board. No lifeboat in sight, no crew to be found. It was as if the Mary Celeste had become a ghost ship long before the Dei Gratia had even laid eyes on her. The mystery was thickening. The lifeboat missing, the supplies untouched, and the ship still in fine condition. The sea whispered no answers, only questions. Where had they gone? Why had they left behind everything they needed to survive? The Mary Celeste had become a riddle wrapped in the calm of the ocean, a puzzle with pieces scattered across the vast waters, and no one left to piece it together. As the Dei Gratia's crew stood on the silent deck of the Mary Celeste, the unanswered questions began to multiply. A ship, abandoned so suddenly with no sign of struggle, no cries for help, and no bodies to be found. It defied all logic. How could this happen? What could have forced a crew of 9 men and women to abandon ship in the middle of the Atlantic, leaving everything they knew behind? And where were they now? Theories swirled among the crew of the Dei Gratia as they searched the ship for answers. The possibilities were endless, and the most obvious explanations seemed the most terrifying. Was it piracy? Had a band of ruthless thieves boarded the Mary Celeste, attacking the crew and stealing the ship's valuable cargo? The thought sent a chill down the spine of every sailor on board. But there was one problem. There were no signs of violence, no blood, no struggle. The ship's cargo, barrels of alcohol, industrial chemicals, and other goods, was all intact. If pirates had taken control of the ship, why leave the precious cargo untouched? The second theory was mutiny. Perhaps in the isolation of the sea, the crew had turned against Captain Briggs. Perhaps there had been a violent rebellion, one where the captain, his family, and the loyal crew members were overpowered and cast into the sea. But again, there were no signs of bloodshed, no traces of violence on deck. The logbook showed no indication of unrest, no notes of conflict, no tensions between the captain and his men. It was a theory that seemed plausible in the minds of those desperate for answers, but it didn't fit the evidence. And then there was the theory that the crew had been struck by a storm, a tempest so violent that it forced them to abandon ship. Perhaps a rogue wave had slammed into the vessel, throwing the crew into chaos. Maybe the lifeboat had been lowered in a desperate attempt to escape the storm. But if that were true, why hadn't there been any mention of the storm in the logbook? Why were the sails still set, and the ship in such pristine condition? A storm would have left its mark on the ship. Broken rigging, shattered barrels, perhaps even signs of water flooding below deck. But there was nothing. The Mary Celeste seemed untouched by nature's fury. As the crew of the Dei Gratia examined every inch of the ship, the theory of a natural disaster began to lose credibility. The conditions on board, the calm, the quiet, seemed at odds with the idea of a sudden violent storm. So what was the truth? What had caused the Mary Celeste to drift alone on the vast ocean with no sign of life? The mystery deepened with every unanswered question. Had something supernatural occurred? Was the ship cursed? Or had the crew simply disappeared, leaving only their belongings, their ship, and their story behind? As the days stretched on, the theories multiplied, but no answers were forthcoming. The Mary Celeste had become more than a ship. It had become a legend, a symbol of the unknown. Theories were all they had, but the truth remained elusive, just out of reach. The Mary Celeste stood still, a ghost of its former self, floating silently in the endless blue. Every creak of the ship's timber, every ripple against the hull seemed to echo through the hollow emptiness. It was in this stillness that the Dei Gratia's crew began their thorough investigation, hoping to piece together the puzzle of what had happened to the Mary Celeste and its missing crew. One of the first clues they uncovered was the captain's logbook. It lay open on Captain Briggs's desk, its pages yellowed with age but clearly legible. The final entry was made just days before the ship was found adrift. It spoke of calm seas and fair weather, but there was no mention of distress, no forewarning of the catastrophe that would unfold. It was an ordinary entry, one that could have been written on any other voyage. The last words were simple, almost mundane. Weather fine. All well. These were the final recorded words of the Mary Celeste's journey, leaving the crew of the Dei Gratia with nothing but questions. As they scoured the ship, they found other fragments of the crew's life aboard the ship. A pocket watch, its hands frozen at the time of the final entry. A diary, half open on the captain's bed, its pages filled with accounts of calm seas and routine life on board. But just like the logbook, there was nothing that could explain the sudden abandonment. The silence of the ship was deafening, as though the crew had simply vanished in the blink of an eye, leaving no trace of what had occurred in the hours before they disappeared. The clocks were all stopped. The timepieces scattered across the ship, on the captain's desk, in the galley, in the crew quarters, were all frozen at the exact same time, the hour of the final log entry. This eerie coincidence unsettled the Dei Gratia crew. Could it have been a sign? A moment frozen in time, just before disaster struck? Or was it merely a strange quirk of fate, a coincidence in the midst of a vast and inexplicable mystery? The diaries, too, revealed no hint of panic or impending doom. There was no sign that the crew had felt threatened or fearful. Their writings were routine, ordinary accounts of life on the sea. They spoke of the weather, of the day-to-day operations of the ship, but nothing more. Even the captain's personal diary, where one might expect private thoughts, perhaps hints of stress or worry, was devoid of anything unusual. His entries were simple, reflective, almost serene. There was no sense of urgency, no mention of conflict, and certainly no indication that the crew was about to abandon ship. But the most chilling detail was the profound silence that hung over the Mary Celeste. The ship felt abandoned, not just in a physical sense, but emotionally as well. There were no signs of hasty departure, no dropped tools or belongings strewn about in panic. It was as if, in the blink of an eye, every soul had simply stepped away from their lives, leaving behind their work, their possessions, and their very selves. And so, the mystery deepened. Diaries and clocks offered only more questions. What had happened in the final moments aboard the Mary Celeste? Was it an event so extraordinary that no one could comprehend it? Or had the crew, for reasons unknown, simply disappeared into the vastness of the ocean? The silence of the ship was overwhelming, and it seemed as though it held the answers, but none could unlock its secrets. As the Dei Gratia's crew stood in the eerie stillness of the Mary Celeste, the silence was only broken by the distant call of seabirds and the creak of timbers. The mystery surrounding the ship had grown even deeper, its unanswered questions stretching far beyond the realm of common sense. And so speculation began, an endless web of theories, some grounded in science, others plunging into the realms of the supernatural. The first theories to emerge were the scientific ones, attempting to explain the disappearance with the cold logic of nature. One of the most widely discussed explanations was that the Mary Celeste had fallen victim to a natural phenomenon, an underwater earthquake or a rogue wave, perhaps, a violent yet sudden event that might have caused the crew to panic and flee the ship. It was theorized that a rogue wave, giant, unpredictable, and destructive, could have hit the vessel, leading to confusion and chaos, compelling the crew to abandon ship in a desperate attempt to survive. Another scientific theory revolved around the potential effects of the ship's cargo. The Mary Celeste was carrying barrels of denatured alcohol, and some speculated that the fumes might have led to an explosion or fire. The smell of fumes could have created a panic among the crew, forcing them to leave in haste. But if that were true, why were the barrels still securely sealed? Why were there no signs of fire? If the ship had been set ablaze, surely there would have been burn marks, or at least smoke, lingering in the air. Yet, the Mary Celeste was completely intact. It made little sense. As scientific explanations seemed to offer no conclusive answers, the theory of a supernatural explanation began to take hold. Could the ship have been cursed? After all, the Mary Celeste was not the first vessel to meet an untimely and mysterious fate. Some believed that the ship's strange disappearance was the result of a curse, a force beyond human comprehension. According to this theory, the ship was somehow doomed from the very beginning, as if some malevolent force had decided to seal the fate of the crew. There were even whispers among the superstitious that the Mary Celeste had encountered the legendary Bermuda Triangle area, an infamous region known for the unexplained disappearances of ships and aircraft. Though the Mary Celeste was far north of the triangle's usual boundaries, some believed that the ship had crossed into an area of unnatural forces where time and space no longer held their normal laws. And then, there were the more fantastical theories, those that reached into the realm of the paranormal. Some speculated that the ship had been taken by ghosts, that the souls of its crew had vanished into the spirit world. Had they encountered something from beyond the grave, an unknown entity or force that caused them to vanish in an instant? Were they taken by sea spirits or mythical creatures that lurked beneath the waves, preying on sailors who dared to navigate the deep? As the days passed, the lines between science and the supernatural began to blur. Rational explanations seemed inadequate, and the more extraordinary theories gained traction. Could something otherworldly have caused the disappearance of the Mary Celeste's crew? Was there an explanation that lay outside the realm of human understanding? No matter where the theories led, one thing was certain. The mystery of the Mary Celeste would never be solved easily. Whether driven by scientific phenomena or the whisper of ancient paranormal forces, the ship's story continued to captivate the minds of those who dared to explore its dark secrets. In the end, the truth seemed to remain just out of reach, tantalizingly close, but impossible to grasp. The Mary Celeste drifted through the vast ocean, a vessel whose only cargo now was mystery. But its story did not end with the discovery of the abandoned ship. The legal and financial battles that followed were as twisted and complicated as the fate of the missing crew itself. Salvage rights, ownership disputes, and questions of responsibility clouded the once simple matter of retrieving the ship. What began as an attempt to understand what happened aboard the Mary Celeste quickly became a web of legal entanglements, drawing in lawyers, salvagers, and maritime courts. The first trial of the Mary Celeste was not one of murder or foul play, but one of salvage rights. The Dei Gratia had found the ship and brought it to port, and with it came the hope of a sizable financial reward. However, the question arose, who truly had the right to claim the ship? Was it the Dei Gratia's crew who discovered it? Or was it the owners of the Mary Celeste who still held legal claim to the vessel? The matter was far from straightforward. The Dei Gratia's captain, David Morehouse, filed for salvage rights, arguing that the ship was abandoned and had no legal owner at the time it was discovered. The ship had been found drifting aimlessly, with no sign of its crew and no official communication from the Mary Celeste's owners. According to maritime law, this made the Dei Gracia's crew eligible for a salvage reward, a payment for saving a ship from peril. However, the owners of the Mary Celeste, who had been unaware of the ship's abandonment, disputed this claim, arguing that the ship was still legally theirs. The case soon found itself tied up in a battle over ownership and salvage rewards, a complex mess that left both sides claiming victory and defeat. As the legal proceedings unfolded, a deeper issue emerged: the state of the ship itself. While the Dei Gratia had discovered the Mary Celeste, there was no sign of foul play aboard the vessel. In fact, there was no damage at all. The ship was still seaworthy, the cargo intact, and the crew's disappearance remained the central enigma. Despite the pristine condition of the vessel, the courts were hesitant to declare it abandoned without first understanding what had happened to the crew. Was the Mary Celeste simply the victim of a strange and inexplicable disaster? Or was there something more sinister at play? Meanwhile, theories of foul play and criminality lingered in the background, further complicating the case. Some speculated that the ship's disappearance had been orchestrated for financial gain, that the crew had been deliberately abandoned for some unknown reason. But with no evidence to support this, the theories remained little more than wild speculation, distracting from the legal questions that took center stage. In the end, the Mary Celeste's story in the courtroom was as mysterious as the ship's disappearance. The salvage rights dispute was settled with a modest award to the Dei Gratia, but questions about the ship's ownership and the fate of the crew were left unresolved. The Mary Celeste was ultimately sold at auction, its legacy tangled in legal ambiguity and maritime law. Though the ship's fate was sealed in the courts, the mystery of the crew's disappearance remained unsolved. The courts had failed to provide any closure, and instead, they had added another layer of complexity to an already confounding enigma. The Mary Celeste would forever remain a ship of legal confusion, its true story slipping through the cracks of history, a puzzle that no one could solve. As the Mary Celeste's mystery continued to captivate the world, whispers spread far and wide, carried on the winds of the sea. The ship's disappearance became more than a tragic incident. It became a breeding ground for rumors, lost testimonies, and cryptic letters. It wasn't just the authorities and sailors who sought answers. The public wanted to understand. They hungered for some piece of truth, something that could shed light on the inexplicable and bring closure to the enigma. Yet, with each passing day, the waters seemed to grow murkier. In the wake of the Mary Celeste's discovery, letters began to emerge, some from reputable sources, others from mysterious figures claiming insider knowledge. One of the first and most famous letters came from the Dei Gratia's first mate, who provided an account of the ship's state when they found it. His words painted a picture of a ship abandoned in haste, ropes cut, lifeboat missing, and the ship's course unmoved. He mentioned the discovery of the captain's logbook, a seemingly ordinary object that would turn out to be the key to one of the ship's most perplexing details: the final entry in the log. The last recorded position of the Mary Celeste was written just hours before it was found abandoned. Nothing could explain what happened in that short window of time, but it wasn't just official reports that circulated. Rumors, some outrageous, others compelling, began to spread like wildfire. Some people swore they had heard of strange phenomena aboard the Mary Celeste, stories of an eerie silence that surrounded the ship even before its crew vanished. According to one rumor, a sailor had seen a glowing figure near the ship's mast, casting a faint shadow that vanished as quickly as it appeared. This led some to speculate that the ship had fallen victim to some sort of supernatural event, a haunting or curse that had claimed the souls aboard. Others spoke of sightings, vague and unreliable, that seemed to suggest the crew had been abandoned for a reason. One such report came from a passing ship, which claimed to have spotted the Mary Celeste just days before its discovery. According to this account, the ship had been sailing strangely erratically, its sails unfurled but seemingly without direction, as though its crew was trying to escape something. However, when the report was followed up, no one could confirm whether it was true or just an exaggeration. Perhaps the most frustrating aspect of the Mary Celeste mystery was the number of testimonies that were lost to time. Some sailors, who claimed to have known the Mary Celeste's crew or had heard their final words, were never able to testify in any formal way. Their stories were either drowned out by the growing sea of rumors or were dismissed as hearsay. As more time passed, it became clear that many pieces of vital information were forever lost. Crucial details about the crew's final days and the true events leading up to their disappearance were locked away in the hearts of the few who had seen or heard something and would never speak of it again. The combination of official reports, cryptic letters, and unreliable rumors created a tangled web of theories. Some were grounded in reality, others in superstition, but all of them left the central question unanswered. What had happened to the Mary Celeste and her crew? The mystery seemed to grow with every letter sent and every rumor whispered. For some, it was a simple case of a ship lost to nature's whims, but for others, the unanswered questions made it feel like the Mary Celeste was cursed, trapped in a story of lost testimonies and mysterious letters, forever out of reach. As the years passed, the Mary Celeste's story transformed from a bizarre maritime incident into a full-fledged legend. What began as an unsolved mystery, a mere headline in a newspaper, gradually became a symbol of the eerie and the unexplained. The ship that had once been a symbol of commercial enterprise now haunted the collective imagination of the public. Tales were spun, theories were born, and the Mary Celeste became more than just a lost ship. It became a ghost story, a riddle wrapped in the mists of time. With each retelling, the facts of the case seemed to morph, taking on a darker, more thrilling edge. No longer was the disappearance of the crew merely the result of a freak accident or a natural calamity. The Mary Celeste began to be associated with the supernatural, a vessel doomed by some malevolent force. Newspaper articles started referring to it as the ghost ship, a term that captured the essence of the unknown, the eerie silence that surrounded the ship's abandonment. The term stuck, and soon it became the defining characteristic of the Mary Celeste's legacy. One theory that gained traction during this time was that the ship had been cursed. Some suggested that the Mary Celeste had been doomed from the moment it was built, its construction marred by bad luck and ill omens. Others believed that the crew had been the victims of a supernatural presence, something that had driven them to madness or forced them to abandon ship in terror. It was said that the ship's hold, which contained barrels of alcohol, had emitted strange vapors. Maybe those fumes were responsible for a haunting that clouded the crew's minds, driving them to jump overboard or to seek refuge in the lifeboat, never to return. As rumors spread, books were written, and a sense of mystery enveloped the Mary Celeste. Soon the ship became a staple in maritime folklore, with sailors and landlubbers alike offering their own wild explanations for the crew's disappearance. Some believed that the Mary Celeste had been the victim of mutiny. Perhaps the crew had rebelled against their captain, and in the chaos, they had abandoned the ship. Others said that piracy was to blame, speculating that a band of ruthless criminals had raided the ship, leaving the crew stranded on a deserted island or lost at sea. Theories ranged from plausible to fantastical, but each theory contributed to the growing legend. The media's fascination with the case didn't help clarify the facts. It only amplified the mystery. Over time, the Mary Celeste ceased being just a ship that had lost its crew. It became a symbol of everything unexplained in the world, an enigma that resisted all attempts to solve it. What had truly happened? Why had the crew vanished without a trace? And why, despite all the theories and investigations, did the truth still elude everyone? People's imaginations ran wild, and the Mary Celeste became a character in a larger narrative, a living myth. The ship was no longer just a vessel lost to history. It became an embodiment of the unknown, a reminder of the vastness and danger of the ocean, where even the most ordinary events could slip into the realm of the supernatural. As the legend of the Mary Celeste continued to take shape, its true story was slowly obscured, lost beneath layers of speculation, rumor, and fantasy. But what remained was a haunting image, the ghost ship, sailing the seas with no crew, no explanation, and no end to its mystery. As the Mary Celeste's story continued to haunt the world's imagination, the question that lingered on everyone's lips became far more urgent. Was it human error, a simple mistake made by a captain and crew who misjudged their fate? Or was it nature's cruel trick, an event so strange, so beyond human comprehension, that it defied all logical explanation? The theories were endless, but the true cause of the Mary Celeste's abandonment remained as elusive as the ship's missing crew. For those who believed in human error, the explanation was relatively simple: a series of miscalculations, poor decisions, and an unfortunate chain of events. Critics argued that Captain Briggs, though an experienced sailor, had made a fatal error in judgment. It was suggested that the ship had encountered rough weather, a storm, perhaps, and the crew, fearing for their lives, had panicked. They may have abandoned the ship in haste, taking the lifeboat with them but leaving the ship itself relatively intact, hoping to be rescued later. But as the days passed, they would have realized their mistake, too late to return to the Mary Celeste. What began as a precautionary escape turned into a tragic, irreversible decision. Some even questioned the wisdom of taking the family on board, suggesting that the stress and responsibilities of having a child aboard might have weighed heavily on the captain's mind. Was he distracted? Was he unable to make sound decisions in the face of danger? Could the presence of his wife and daughter have contributed to a state of panic that ultimately led to the abandonment of ship and crew? Yet, despite the seemingly logical explanation of human error, something about the Mary Celeste's fate didn't sit right. The ship was in perfect condition when discovered. No sign of damage, no indication of a storm. There were no visible injuries to suggest an attack or mutiny. Even the ship's cargo remained largely untouched. If the crew had abandoned the ship in panic, why would they leave behind such valuable supplies? Then there were the nature-focused theories. Some suggested that the crew had fallen victim to an environmental phenomenon so rare, so inexplicable, that it would forever escape human understanding. One theory pointed to a sudden and powerful waterspout, a fierce column of water that could have caused the crew to abandon ship in fear of being dragged under. It was said that these waterspouts could appear without warning, whipping up winds and waves, creating a maelstrom around the ship and disorienting anyone caught in its grip. Perhaps the Mary Celeste had been caught in one of these natural wonders, and in the ensuing chaos, the crew was forced to make a desperate escape. Others believed that a sudden violent wind, or an atmospheric anomaly, might have hit the ship without any visible warning, rendering the crew too disoriented to make logical decisions. Some even suggested that a powerful wave or underwater earthquake could have shifted the ship's balance, giving the crew little time to react before they made the choice to abandon ship. But perhaps the most unsettling thought was the possibility that nature had, in some strange way, played a part in the crew's disappearance, and that the crew, realizing the ship was doomed, made an escape that seemed rational at the time. Yet in hindsight, it became their greatest tragedy. The Mary Celeste was a vessel that seemed to offer no answers, only more questions. Was it human error, the mistakes of men trying to survive in the face of nature's wrath? Or was it a freak accident, an act of nature too powerful and strange to understand? In the end, both explanations held weight. The more answers one found, the more questions surfaced. The mystery of the Mary Celeste would never fully be solved, as it continued to be a haunting reminder of the fragile boundary between human understanding and the untamed forces of nature. As the years wore on, and the Mary Celeste became enshrined in maritime lore, the most chilling aspect of the ship's mystery wasn't necessarily the unanswered questions, it was the fear that the unknown inspired. The Mary Celeste's fate seemed to embody one of humanity's greatest fears, the fear of being lost, utterly and completely, in a world that doesn't make sense. It is the fear that no matter how hard we try to understand, there are forces beyond our control, forces so vast and incomprehensible that they render us powerless. The ship itself, adrift without a crew, became a symbol of that profound fear, a stark reminder that in the deep, boundless ocean, human knowledge and survival instincts are mere grains of sand in an overwhelming sea of uncertainty. What had happened to the Mary Celeste was not just a mystery to be solved, it was a riddle wrapped in an enigma, a challenge to our belief that we can ever truly understand the world around us. It wasn't just the disappearance of the crew that haunted people, it was the silence that followed. The Mary Celeste was not a ship lost to a storm or wrecked by pirates. It wasn't a vessel swallowed by a massive wave or torn apart in a deadly battle at sea. No, the Mary Celeste had been found floating aimlessly, her sails slack and her decks deserted. She was not a wreck, but a perfectly intact ship. Nothing about it screamed disaster. Yet everything about it spoke of a catastrophe, and that, in itself, was terrifying. The ship's silence resonated deeply within the human psyche. For sailors of the time, the Mary Celeste became a ghost story, an image of a ship that had sailed into the unknown, where reality seemed to shift and time itself stood still. The absence of a crew, the missing lifeboat, the untouched cargo, all these details began to blend into a haunting narrative. Was it a natural phenomenon that caused the crew to abandon the ship, or had something far more sinister occurred? Was it the work of the supernatural, or simply an accident that no one could fully comprehend? In a world dominated by logic and reason, the Mary Celeste represented an unsettling reminder that there are still mysteries that defy all explanation. People struggled to come to terms with the possibility that some things in life are simply beyond our understanding. The fear of the unknown is not just about what we can't explain, it's about what we can't even begin to fathom. In the absence of solid evidence, imagination filled in the blanks. And the more imaginative the theories, the more they seemed to feed the fear. Some believed the ship had been cursed, others that it had been claimed by ghosts. A few even suggested that the crew had encountered some form of madness, driven to abandon the ship in a blind panic. What was truly terrifying was the idea that the Mary Celeste might have been a witness to something that could never be fully known, an event that humanity was never meant to understand. The legend of the Mary Celeste continues to endure because it taps into that universal fear, the fear that there are things out there that are too big, too unknowable for us to grasp. No matter how many theories are proposed or how much time passes, the ultimate truth about the Mary Celeste may never be known. And that, perhaps, is the most frightening thing of all. The Mary Celeste has captivated the world for over a century. But beyond the surface of the mystery, there is an unnerving question that continues to haunt those who delve into the story. What happens to the human mind when isolated in a vast, unforgiving environment, when there is no escape and no one to hear your cry for help? The psychology of isolation is not just a concept, It is a very real experience that can unravel the strongest minds. For the crew of the Mary Celeste, it was not just the sea that posed a threat. It was the psychological toll of isolation that might have driven them to abandon ship. Imagine the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean surrounding you, nothing but water, stretching endlessly in every direction. Out there, time feels distorted. The world seems to fade away. Days blur into one another. Loneliness is palpable, hanging over you like a heavy fog. For sailors, aboard a ship, even the quietest moments are broken by the groan of wood, the creak of sails, the slap of waves against the hull. But when the Mary Celeste was found adrift, there was nothing. No sounds, no people, no sign of life. What could drive a crew to abandon a ship under such calm conditions? In the absence of any visible disaster, the question becomes more psychological than physical. The human mind, when deprived of external stimuli and companionship, begins to deteriorate in ways that are hard to comprehend. Prolonged isolation can lead to a breakdown in judgment, anxiety, and a creeping sense of panic. The longer the isolation, the more the mind begins to bend reality, creating fears and doubts that might never have existed before. Perhaps it was the isolation that affected the crew of the Mary Celeste, an isolation so intense that it drove them to make irrational decisions. Could the crew have feared that something unseen and unknown was lurking in the vast ocean, waiting to claim them? Could the silence on board the ship have been deafening, creating an atmosphere of dread that no one could escape? This psychological toll is not new. It's been studied for years by scientists who have explored the effects of isolation in extreme conditions. In fact, many theories suggest that long-term isolation can lead to the breakdown of the mind, where even the most grounded individuals begin to question reality, losing their grip on what is real and what is imagined. In such a setting, paranoia can run rampant, and simple tasks can become monumental. What was once a simple, routine journey may have turned into a battle for sanity. The human mind is not built for prolonged isolation, whether out at sea or in solitary confinement. As the days stretch on with no end in sight, the mind starts to crumble under the weight of uncertainty. Fear grows in the empty spaces, and the unknown becomes a terrifying presence that cannot be ignored. What was once a calm voyage turned into something much darker, fueled by a fear that was never fully understood. Perhaps the crew of the Mary Celeste wasn't running from a physical threat, but from something much more intangible. The suffocating weight of isolation, the madness it can breed, and the terrifying power it has to distort reality itself. In the end, the Mary Celeste wasn't just a ship lost at sea. It was a reminder of the fragility of the human mind when faced with the unimaginable terror of total isolation. And the true horror lies in knowing that we may never fully understand the psychological torment those aboard the Mary Celeste endured before vanishing into the unknown. The Mary Celeste is not just a story of a ship lost to history. It is a haunting reminder that some mysteries remain unsolved, and some questions linger in the dark corners of our minds. Over a century has passed since her fateful journey, but the eerie thought still creeps into our collective consciousness. What if it happens again? What if another ship sailing across the same vast and unforgiving ocean is found with no crew, no answers, and only silence to tell the tale? It's easy to dismiss the Mary Celeste as a fluke, a bizarre incident that happened long ago, never to be repeated. But that would be a dangerous oversight. The world has changed, and the seas are still filled with mystery, unpredictability, and untold dangers. The disappearance of the Mary Celeste was an anomaly in an age of exploration, but today, as our ships grow larger and more technologically advanced, one question remains. Could it happen again? As maritime technology has progressed, so too has the complexity of our vessels and the unpredictability of the oceans. Modern ships are equipped with the latest tracking systems, weather forecasting technology, and safety protocols. Yet we still hear stories of mysterious disappearances, vessels lost in the Bermuda Triangle, crew members who vanish without a trace. The question of the Mary Celeste lingers because it reminds us that even with all our advancements, we are still vulnerable to forces beyond our control. Could the ocean be hiding more than we know? The sea is vast and mysterious, with much of its depths unexplored. What lies beneath the surface is a world of its own, a place where the rules of our understanding do not always apply. In the deep, where no human has set foot, strange and inexplicable things can happen. Is it possible that there are still unknown forces at work, be they natural, supernatural, or something else entirely, that could cause another vessel to go missing without explanation? Perhaps it's not just the sea we should fear, but the psychological toll it takes on the Perhaps it's not just the sea we should fear, but the psychological toll it takes on those who traverse its waters. Isolation, uncertainty, and the vast, empty horizon can drive the human mind to the edge. What if, in the future, another crew faces the same fate? Abandoning ship in a panic, driven to the edge by unseen forces or an unknown terror? What if, just as the crew of the Mary Celeste faced their own unraveling, the same dark fear takes hold of a new generation of sailors? The idea that it could happen again is both chilling and unsettling. After all, the ocean hasn't changed. The dangers we face on the open water may have evolved, but they are no less real. And as technology advances, we might think we're safe. But could it be that the Mary Celeste was just the beginning of a deeper, more terrifying mystery, one that we have yet to fully understand? It is a question that leaves us with more fear than answers. As long as ships sail the seas, as long as there are those who venture into the unknown, the haunting thought remains. What if it happens again? The Mary Celeste remains a ghost story that refuses to die. Despite the years that have passed and the theories that have been proposed, there's an undeniable aura of haunting mystery that continues to cling to the abandoned ship. A ghost ship that sails forever, lost in time. A vessel that drifts through the annals of history. Its story never fully understood, yet never fully forgotten. The Mary Celeste is not merely a ship that disappeared. It is the embodiment of something far darker, an enigma that time cannot erase. It is a symbol of the unknown, an unsolved puzzle that refuses to yield to logic or reason. It is the ghost that haunts the vast expanse of the ocean, forever adrift in the collective consciousness of sailors, historians, and dreamers alike. As the Mary Celeste drifts in our imaginations, it has become a symbol of all that is mysterious and unexplainable about the sea. Every year the story is retold, its legend growing as new generations of curious minds attempt to unravel its truth. But the more we learn, the more questions arise, and the deeper the mystery grows. The ship has become a ghost that will never rest, condemned to sail forever, its secrets locked away beneath the waves. In a way, the Mary Celeste is the perfect metaphor for the unknown. Its fate is a mirror to the mysteries of the sea itself, vast, unexplored, and full of peril. The ocean is a place where life can disappear without a trace, where ships can be swallowed by the deep, and where the line between reality and myth becomes blurred. The Mary Celeste serves as a constant reminder that the sea is as much a place of legend as it is of reality. The eerie calm of the Mary Celeste when it was discovered is the stuff of nightmares. The ship, untouched and abandoned, with no trace of its crew, is a haunting image that lingers in the minds of all who hear the tale. It is as though the ship itself became a ghost, drifting through the waters, searching for its crew, searching for an explanation that will never come. And the longer the mystery remains unsolved, the more the ship seems to transcend time, becoming an eternal presence in the stories of the sea. Perhaps it is this very uncertainty that keeps the Mary Celeste alive in our imaginations. For while we may never know the truth, the legend will continue to haunt us. It is a ghost ship that sails forever, drifting in the fog of history, carrying with it the unanswered questions that will never fade away. Each wave that laps against its hull, each gust of wind that flaps its sails, is a reminder that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, but rather to be revered, feared, and wondered about. The Mary Celeste is a ghost ship, yes, but it is more than that. It is the ghost that sails forever, through time, through memory, and through the eerie silence of the sea.